Welcome to another Learning Council podcast. This is your host, LeiLani CEO and publisher at Learning Council News Media and Research. So let's talk about our topic today, and I'll introduce you to my guest. So the topic is signal versus noise, building critical thinking skills amid the generative AI hype. Seems like everybody wants to talk about AI, and that's all they want to talk about. They're sort of narrow banded in it. All right, so I have with me my friend Jeff Walsh, who's the founder and CEO of Sooth.FYI. If you were to look it up online, it looks like Sooth, SOOTH.FYI. So prior to launching Sooth in 2022, he had over 14 years of executive experience in finance and operations. Those are the fun parts of companies, right? Like numbers and HR and telling people what to do.
Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, prior to that, he served as a combat decorated Marine Corps infantry officer for 8 years. Congratulations. That's amazing.
Thank you.
And his education includes a BS from Bucknell, MBA from Dartmouth, and an MALD from Tufts. Did I say that
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Master of Arts in Law and Diplomacy. It's a mouthful.
Yeah, I didn't even know about that.
Yeah,
So
I know.
I'm duly impressed. Let's just say that. So you launched in 2022 this product that is Sooth FYI to address growing concerns around our information ecosystem in education, right? And the impact. This is really an important conversation we're going to have today because we just had a national election. And so it's really, really good timing to talk about what's going on in information and lesson building and everything that goes on in education. So let's start
100%.
with this. So critical thinking, first of all, is like the holy grail in education. People want that. People want to have kids learn to think critically and not just memorize information and regurgitate it, because they've been getting bashed on the head in education about that for a really long time. So it's all about like, how do you teachers encourage that? How do they encourage that with critical writing, with researching, collaborative projects? So tell me, the field you're in is the trusted search, right? And what would be important about that versus just going over to one of these generative AIs and just blah, right? Talk
Hmm.
about that.
Yeah, or traditional search like Google or Bing or Yahoo. Yeah. So I 100% agree with you. Critical thinking is and should always be the holy grail in education, right? I mean, it's the probably the most important skill set that someone is going to be able to offer an employer, as well as the most important skill set to just thrive in life. So yeah, critical thinking is the most important thing. Now, when we think about the building blocks to like, okay, what do we need in order to foster critical thinking and allow the kids to build this muscle, right? Because it's not a binary like, oh, you can think critically, good, move on to the next lesson. It's really a muscle that can atrophy over time, and and it takes a while to build. One of the fundamental pieces to even being able to do it is access to high quality, diverse information, right? And like you pointed out a minute ago, we just had presidential election. It is a great opportunity to analyze what it looked like from a policy perspective, right? And what was on the voters' mind, what issues did people vote on, and how are those issues debated? It all involves and requires diverse, high quality information in order to have an informed view on something and to think about it independently and critically, right? It's not like
Yeah.
there's always a right answer. So it starts with access to high quality information.
Right.
That's the fundamental. And so that's where our product comes in. You mentioned, generative AI, chatbots, answer engines, if you want to call them that. Before we go there, let me just tell you what I think the right solution is before I tell you why I think those, are the sub-optimized solutions. The right solution, if high quality, diverse information is a prerequisite to building your critical thinking skills and your knowledge discovery, then the best platform or the best solution to foster that would be a place where the students can access all of this high quality information without any noise, without any distractions, with a virtual guarantee that everything they're going to be confronted with, all of the search results are going to be immediately actionable, that you can trust this. You might not have to agree with it, but you can trust it. It is a credible source. It's an expert source, or it is, legitimate data.
Okay, so let's just stop right there for just a second. So let me think this through. So if you just did a regular Google search or regular generative AI thing, you could be past a lot of noise, right? A lot of pages to go through that are biased or whatever, depending on which search engine you're using, right? We know this. And a lot of stuff that sort of takes you down rabbit holes. So it's a time issue there. But also I'm thinking through so our topic is critical thinking, right? What does that do to the critical thinker, right? So you have to already have critical thinking skills in order to get critical thinking skills is basically the problem, right?
Yeah.
So you're like,
Yeah.
oh, well, here's a little rabbit hole, go down that, and then you believe it. And it's like
Yeah.
it's like your basic data point, right? It's a building block of your little house. And now you're going to build everything else off that little thing that you went down this rabbit hole wasn't even true. So what you're saying is that you have guardrails of true information from perspectives, right? And from there, the student can actually have building blocks rather than they went down the rabbit holes with noise and confusion and
Yeah.
strange videos that were AI generated and all that,
Yeah,
right?
you're streamlining the process. I mean, the fact that we have noise in the system, and it's always been there, right? Because think about the internet 5, 10, 20 years ago, right? There was a decent amount of signal and some noise. And you learn to navigate through the noise, whether it was an ad or a sponsored content or a dubious source. You learn to navigate it, right? And you would look out for the sources that you recognize. Maybe it has a .edu, domain or whatever, but we could navigate it fairly efficiently. Over time, in particular the last few years, it's gotten more and more challenging for a number of reasons. The volume increase in the noise has accelerated. So that's like a big factor, right? There's just more noise to sift through. So you, the student, trying to build your understanding around a particular topic, you are now going to waste more time sifting through the noise. That's a very unedifying task. I mean, that is not, learning to navigate Google or, pick your search engine. That is not a skill that an employer is going to value. They want to know how you're going to be able to analyze something and how you think critically about an important topic. So if you think about the proverbial needle in a haystack, if the true challenge to the student is develop the critical thinking and therefore pick your topic and tell me about it, learn about it, look at it, explore it from all sides. The last thing you want to do is have the kids spend half their time just looking for the needles in the haystack. So why don't remove all the hay, give them all the needles, and then let them go about the real edifying task of building the critical thinking skills. So that is that's what we've done is we've removed the noise, we've elevated all of the high quality and diverse, right? Diversity is a big part of this, and it's not just diversity of perspective, but it's also diversity of source. Like whether it might be a think tank, right? It might be a government organization or an intergovernmental organization like the IMF, or a consultant, the experts, people that are true industry experts, elevating that content, getting them exposed to new sources so they're not always going to the same ones, and then letting them understand that, wow, these are complex topics. There's never always one right answer, and they have to determine for themselves, what's important to them. And so
go ahead. So it's really a guard railing of what can be trusted, but not a curtailing of access to.
No, if anything, it's elevating the access as well, because one of the other major initiatives that we have, it's not just removing the noise, and elevating the quality content, but it's also bringing down the paywalls as well. So forming partnerships with news providers and other sources of premium information that typically have their content behind paywalls, and partnering with them and getting that content accessible for the students. So it truly is a place to go to do deep research and get in the flow. And I can kind of guarantee to any of your listeners, if you experience it and if you try it, you're going to see for yourself that you really truly can become an expert on something through the exploration and the knowledge discovery process.
Right. Yeah. So I think when we first started talking, and I'm going to lead into my next sort of question area for you, is you learned I was on the debate team in high school and college, and spent many years of my life in libraries, right? Where you could probably trust the content, but it took a long time. It was very arduous, and there was a ton of critical thinking, believe me, but you had to learn from a debate viewpoint how to argue either side. You had to, because you didn't know what you were going to be assigned when you got into the debate.
I love that.
Which was so amazing for me, right? Like to this day, I just love that experience. I wish I could have done it for the rest of my life because it was wonderful. But it really taught me to be able to adopt other people's viewpoints and just go into it completely and be it, right?
Yeah.
And I think that this is something that we're almost causing to be missing in a lot of schools, which is so not okay if we're trying to go to critical. The two ideas are diametrically opposed. Curtail access, try to cause critical thinking, right? Like so we lead right into the next area, right? Which is we have polarization in culture. We just came off an election and we see it very clearly. There's a good number of the country over here, and then another good number over the country over here. And the ideas between, it's not like when I was young, where the issues were really not widely divergent. Now the issues seem like that's way over there. And this was way over there. And it's just so polarized. So let's talk about that, because
we have a lot to say.
we have a lot to say about that, but it's something schools have to address, right? They have to consider this. If they're trying to create critical thinking, they have to understand how they should be doing it, right? So let's talk about that.
I love your shout out to speech and debate. I couldn't agree more strongly. I wish my kids had done it. I wish I had done it. Because that requirement to being prepared to argue either side of the debate, I think, is such a life skill, and what it does to the mind and the neurons is just, I bet it's fantastic. And that's actually where we got our start, was speech and debate students were using our product, and they were like, oh my gosh, this is exactly what we need, because we need this diversity of sources. So when it comes to polarization, one of the biggest realizations that we had is that I think there is also we aren't just polarized, but we are also confused between the concept of trustworthiness and bias, right? So how many times have you heard, either anecdotally from a friend, or we've seen this in research and polls, people say, oh, I don't trust the news, it's too biased. Or I don't trust that news source, it's too biased. And that's conflating two different issues. Now, there's a relationship between trust and trustworthiness and bias, but they are not the same thing. And so what our platform, what Sooth does really well, in fact, it does it better. It's the only platform that does this, so it does it better than everyone, is we show you the NewsGuard rating for the sources that do have a NewsGuard reliability rating. And then beside that, we show the all sides media bias rating. Those are two independent variables, because think about it. You could be reading or listening to a source that is very high quality, meaning they adhere to the best journalistic principles, right? Over time, they are just consistent. They don't lie. They're very transparent. You know who where their funding's coming from, who is writing the article. They make corrections. They don't have misleading headlines, right? All of the kind of the journalistic criteria. it can be very high quality. However, they can also be elevating a certain type of fact or certain facts around an argument versus other facts that they're not elevating. That's where the bias comes in. So you can still trust them, but you don't have to agree with the way they are prioritizing their argument, right? And
yeah, and I think I totally understand that because I'm journalism trained, right? That's what my degree was in. And when I considered the way we were trained back in the day, we were really pushed against like don't add opinion. Like, But even so, editors chose headlines, right? So as soon as you pick something out of the ether to say this is an important thing to pay attention to, you've already entered an opinion, right?
right, right.
So
And that's why
yeah,
it's so important. That's why it's so important to read across a number of sources, across a number of perspectives, right? You don't want
right.
to just read the same left-leaning source day in, day out, because to your point, that editor or who's ever kind of making the headlines, that's going to possibly have an effect on you. And you don't want to read the same sources that lean right. You want to read a rich diversity of perspectives and think of it. The best way that we like to explain it is think about it as a diet, as your nutritional diet, where you're not going to eat this, an apple a day and only an apple, right? It's good for you, but you need a well-balanced diet. You need, other things in your diet. You're also not going to eat Twinkies all day, but the information that we consume, and in particular, getting back to the critical thinking and knowledge discovery, we need a well-balanced diet. Everything needs to be healthy that we're eating when it comes to information, right? In the knowledge discovery, building critical thinking, right? We don't want your listeners thinking that, when we talk about high quality information, we're really talking in the context of the classroom, right? When that student is doing that research report, or the speech and debate student, or, and so when you think about your nutritional diet, you should think about your information diet in the same exact way.
Yeah, I completely agree with that because it's very easy to go down the road of just scrolling social media all day, every day, which is very poor quality, right? And
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean,
in my reality, right?
yeah, that
And
that to me is a snack food. That's eating Cheetos, right?
yeah, that's just all Cheetos and Twinkies, right?
Right,
Um,
right. And not that you can't have that once in a while, right? But when you think about the balanced, healthy information diet, and again, in the context of building critical thinking and that knowledge discovery, which I think your listeners are going to be most interested in, it is about making sure that what they are engaging with, from the information they're engaging with, is table stakes. It is high quality. It is
right.
credible. And
Yeah.
then looking at the diversity of the source itself. Is it a peer-reviewed research paper? Okay, that's great. However, that's going to be a different type of perspective or data point, if you will, than an article from Wired magazine, which is also
Yeah.
highly credible,
Yeah.
or the Cato Institute or the Brookings Institution. So
Yeah.
getting that diversity is from the student's perspective. They're not wasting time, like sifting through the noise, right? Because that's entirely unedifying. There's really no value in that when it comes to knowledge discovery, and
Right.
and then exposing them to all the different perspectives.
Right. And I think what I find really interesting about this is the fact that, students, I just put myself back into being a teenager, right? Or even like, middle school age. And you're just sponges, right? Whatever's put in front of you, you just eat it all up. And that's the truth, right? My teacher said, I mean, I remember my mom at one point asking me if I love my teacher more than her because I was just teacher this, blah, 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 right? Like it's just like little hero worship, right?
Yeah,
And we laugh about
which
it now, but there's this
it's almost unfair to the
forcing that
teachers.
happens in school. So school is sort of like something to be revered, something to like, you're supposed to respect your teacher, right? You're supposed to respect what they put in front of you and the sources that they allow you to see, right? So I'm
Yeah.
just imagining these young people, if they are allowed to just willy-nilly all over the internet to have their information and their viewpoint, it's easy to, because you're a sponge, to become sort of a singularity in and of yourself. Like, this is your viewpoint. That's the only thing you can ever have. And what happens when you have that is hate,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
You can't adopt another viewpoint. You can't critically think. You can only be this, right? You cannot possibly change. And
Yeah.
we are doing people a huge disfavor. I mean, I would love to be back at that age where I'm with other kids maybe who are of a different viewpoint, and we're having to research something collaboratively. And one of them's arguing with me about this, and the other one's saying about that, and then we all go look at this, and we look at that, and we all go blah, blah, blah. We put the big, we put all the things into the soup, and we have realizations as we're going, and we're learning to critically think, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but the sources better be coming from somewhere credible, not just big fat lies, right? Like, because that would be horrible.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, I think this is all, it goes without saying, right? Like we need the kids to have access. It needs to start with credible sources, right? We That's why we have libraries in schools, right? And access to the academic databases is because we want to at least set the table for them. So then so they can get started with their work. The problem where we are at now, and more importantly, where we are going when we think about the information ecosystem, and I'm talking about like in the digital realm, the internet, social media, et cetera, and the chat bots, the generative AI answer engines, et cetera, et cetera. The problem is that every trend that we are seeing is working against this issue, the access
mm,
to reliable, high quality
mm.
content, right? It is all
Yeah, I didn't think
working
about that.
against. And so what we need to do, frankly, as a society is recognize that our information ecosystem is at risk. I mean, the contamination levels are reaching kind of critical threshold. And by the way, it is, and when I say contamination, I'm referring to the noise, right? The
Yes.
noise in the system as it pertains to knowledge discovery in the classroom for the student to build that critical thinking. The noise in the system is growing faster and faster and faster. And now that we are in this era of generative AI, with text generative AI, the noise is going to outweigh the signal to the point where it'll be kind of impossible to even find the signal. And you can't rely on Google. You can't rely on the chatbots. I mean, there are certain theories. I mean, you could take a real kind of dystopian view and say, you know what? The chatbots aren't going to be able to identify AI generated content from human generated content, right? Because they're going to get so good at producing it themselves, they're going to trick other AI into. So when you go to those
Yeah,
answer
even with
engines,
images and video, right? That's
oh
already
yeah,
happening.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't have a discussion today talking about AGI or ASI, which is, artificial superintelligence, without recognizing that, gosh, if we ever achieve that, what's it going to do to our ability to discern human generated versus AI generated, right? They go hand in hand. And so when it comes to our information ecosystem, how are we going to engage? This is another way to approach the conversation. I've had this
Yeah.
conversation a few times with potential investors. How are you or your children, how do you expect them to engage with information in 10 years from now? And they'll talk about, oh, they're going to talk to their watch, or they're going to talk to their, Meta Ray sun,
Yeah.
glasses,
Yeah.
or their agent. And you're just going to ask it questions and you're going to get the answers. And I say, okay, well, that sounds really cool. What if it's like for a research project for school, right? And they need to kind of, figure things out. Oh, well, they'll get all this information handed to them from the AI. Really? So how are you going to know? How is the student going to know, or the agent itself, that it was real, right?
Well,
And
now
it
we,
gets to the conversation to provenance
yeah.
of the information, and you ultimately get the person to admit, gosh, unless you know what the provenance is of each piece of information that got fed to you, you're not going to know. And
No.
there's going to be uncertainty. And so that's fundamentally kind of what we're addressing, is the fact that you will know on our platform.
Yeah, and I'll comment on something else with relation to that. What I've also noticed as I've used some generative AI and even video generative AI, right? AI has a tendency to do something very scary for me, which is take the level of intelligence that I might put in and dumb it down. I don't know if you've noticed this, but it has a tendency to try to take information and give you, you know, how it gives you summaries and encapsulations. It takes really big ideas that are robust and complex and makes them simple to sound almost like a, you know, like a circus barker, right? Like it's like,
Yeah.
what? That's,
Yeah.
you know,
Amongst
that's
other, yeah,
silly.
yeah.
Yeah.
Amongst other issues, that is one of them. But and I don't want to sound like a Luddite, right? I think generative AI, whether it's text or image or video or
It's
sound,
great. I know.
it
It's
is
great.
great, and it will create a lot of value for society in so many different ways. It's phenomenal. What we are just exclusively focused on is our information landscape, the knowledge information landscape. That's what
Right.
we're exclusively focused on.
And I would like to say this too, is that since AI is predicated on finding itself input from exterior sources, um,
Not necessarily.
yeah, not necessarily. There's
Yeah,
a lot of internal, you know,
ChatGPT doesn't reference any external sources. It just pulls answers based off its training data.
yeah. So right there, it's not news, right? It's not in the moment today, what's happening with humans and on the planet and going on, blah, 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 right? Right there, you have a huge separation between what you're doing and what generative AI will do, right? You're in the moment, in the stream of consciousness of humanity, watching those blurts coming out and the news coming out, blah, 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 and providing those in a guardrailed way. Whereas AI is always going to be behind that point, right? So you're
It,
right here in present time,
yeah, it
and
could
they're
be.
always, yeah.
So not to turn this into an AI, exclusive conversation, but there are techniques where you can source real-time information using
Mm.
generative AI. It's called retrieval augmented generation, or RAG. And that's what like Perplexity does. And I think, Search GPT or GPT Search, whatever they call it, that just launched. I think they do that. Anyone that provide citations for the information that they're giving you, like a Perplexity does, that uses this technique, which can pull near real-time information. I would say that the biggest distinguishing factor between us and that is we're just eliminating the
The noise.
generative part, the AI. Like if your ultimate goal, let's circle this back around to critical thinking, right, and knowledge discovery for the classroom. If you are fundamentally trying to get at building your awareness and your understanding of the complexities around pick your topic, then you need to get to the underlying sources, not a summary that may or may not be hallucinating, that may or may not be pulling accurate data. It may or may not be referencing reliable sources, and it may or may not be referencing diverse, reliable sources. Don't introduce.
Very interesting points right there. I almost want to like pull that out, make a little balloon right here, right? That's
Yeah, those are the layered problems with chatbots or answer engines. Is like, number one, is it a hallucination, or is it an actual fairly accurate summary of some underlying source? And then if it is not a hallucination and it's an accurate summary, what is that underlying source? And is it a reliable source? If it is, great. Okay, how many reliable sources? It usually pulls from 5 or 10. Great, but that's only 5 or 10. There are more sources. Are those diverse perspectives, right? In fact, there was an interesting report that was published. I saw it last week. It's pretty recent, from the Center for Policy Studies, which is a UK think tank. They analyzed the most popular chatbots, and they asked it a series of questions, and then they analyzed the sources, the underlying sources that the chatbots were using as references. And the think tank realized that most of the sources that are populating these summaries from the chatbots are coming from left and left-leaning types of sources. Now, that could be unintentional. It's not, Google and Gemini or OpenAI and ChatGPT, they might not have their thumb on the scale, but that is just a consequence of asking a tool like ChatGPT to summarize something. It's going to make a selection of a bunch of sources, and they could be coming from just one perspective, right? So again, you come back around to this, and it's like, if we're trying to build critical thinking and knowledge discovery, I personally don't think that these tools, answer engines, let's call them answer engines, I don't think they have a place in the conversation. They have a place in society.
Not if you're trying to create critical thinking skill, right?
No,
because sourcing is everything. It's kind of like, a stranger coming out and telling you some big secret and you're supposed to act on it. You're like, well, who are you? You're answering the question of like, who are you? Right. Like, how come you can tell me this stuff and know what, who are you? So I think this is a really important point. I want to wrap up with a couple of other points here. So we have a huge teacher shortage, right now. And administrators are very careful at keeping their teachers. I think one of their big problems is that, it shows up in all of our research, right? Like, please unburden me from all the grading nightmares. Well, so if you're a literature teacher, history teacher, you're a debate coach, whatever, you're trying to do a science project, if you have to also check sources to make sure they're balanced, right? And they're trustworthy, right? Like not biased, blah, blah, blah. That's a nightmare, right? Like,
exactly.
Forget it. Right. Especially when you have more kids than you've ever had because there's not enough teachers and blah, blah, blah. They've given you 7 units to teach every day. And it's just, hell on earth for you to survive all that. So if you can't save time by having something like this, where you can go, okay, where did you get all your sources? Oh, they all came from Sooth.FYI. Okay, I'm fine with you now. Move on with your bad self. I'm just going to grade the work and I not have to check all the sources, right?
100%. LeiLani. So interestingly, we've obviously done a lot of market research, right? And we have a lot of informal conversations with teachers and librarians and students. And for the teachers and librarians, what they tell us is that they are so frustrated with internet search that they restrict it severely in one of a number of ways. Number one is, they just don't assign it, right? Nothing is ever kind of like, go hit Google and look up XYZ. It'll be like, here's an article I printed out, read it, or here are some articles or whatever. Number two is the teacher will give the students a list of domains and say, hey, you can use these websites and only these websites, right? Very rarely do the teachers just say, go hit Google and have at it, right? I know, by the way, use a reliable source, right? Because of that point you just raised is the waste of time and the risks and challenges regarding the credible sources. It's just a waste of time, right? If a student writes a paper and it's cited by, using Wikipedia as the source or, Joe's blog or whatever. So that's where our platform comes in to play, because as you said, you could basically just direct the students to say, hey, do the research or prepare for tomorrow's debate or whatever on Sooth, right? Enough said, end of story, right?
Yeah.
And by the way, the one thing I don't think we've really touched on, which I just want to make a plug for, is we show NewsGuard ratings, right? And you have click-through access to read the underlying nutrition labels. And so when students do need to build their information literacy and their media literacy, we make that as easy as possible. So as they're doing their research and as they're getting exposed to all these high quality sources, they are also able to see why it is a credible source. And and then
I like that.
Yeah. Oh, it's fabulous. And the teachers love it as well. And the students do too.
Okay, so let's talk about one other thing, just one little really quick thing. We're talking about a place that is allowing you through to paid sites, right, to collect some high quality stuff. But we're not just talking like my world of debate and, you know, journalism and, you know, maybe a little bit of, you know, literature kind of stuff. We're talking about any subject, right? Like, because it's all there, right?
Yeah.
Like, so
Yeah.
any teacher, any subject, any arena could be
Virtually.
using this in you know, different project-based learning, collaborative learning, the research writing, the
Yep.
researching, the critical writing.
Yeah.
Okay,
It,
so we're in all areas with your products. It's not like you can't go there if you're not this kind of teacher.
no, correct. It is all areas, but you know, obviously some teachers are just more, they teach a subject that is more conducive to doing online research. Like, you know, if you're in the social sciences, right, or speech and debate, and that just kind of almost demands more
Yeah,
online access. But if you're a math teacher, you know, you probably not today or never have been sending your kids online to do something. So, you know, it's not like we're going to unlock. We could. I mean, I would encourage them to explore it because you just never know.
yeah. Well, I'm just saying, you know, like the NIH is a reputable place to do biology and
Yeah.
science and health research, right? Like, so you're in a biology class and you have 2 weeks of health, right? You're
Yep.
learning about nutrition, you're learning about these things, you're learning about diseases and blah, 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 blah. That's a reputable place. You could learn a lot of stuff that are not reputable with random Google search, right? So I'm just thinking that that's kind of what your thoughts are as you're building out what you've done, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's awesome
Yeah.
product.
We are
Um,
continuously impressed with the use cases and the reasons people are using our platform. Like I said earlier, we started out in the speech and debate arena because that was just our toehold into the education market, right? And then the more and more teachers that got their hands on it, we realized that, you know, oh my gosh, I had seventh graders the other day and I told them to pick a topic. And this one kid did like the history of sailing and he found all his sources on Sooth. And I was like, okay, great.
okay,
You know, it doesn't surprise me
awesome.
because if we think about like in sheer volume numbers, like when you're thinking about thousands of sources online, each source could have millions of pages, right? I mean,
Right.
millions of
Yeah,
pages.
yeah, yeah,
Some do.
billions. I've seen that.
We literally have billions of pages of content access to, right?
Yeah,
So
isn't human knowledge like doubling every like 5 seconds or something? It's like it's some ridiculous thing. Like, wow.
yeah,
So okay.
that,
Well,
yeah, and that's
interesting. This has been really interesting, and I'm proud of what you've done. I think it's something that we really have to bring forward with schools because, you know, we just flipped in this last election to a different party, right? And a lot of people didn't expect that to happen. They're probably wondering why. Like, and the other people that lost the election, they're probably wondering why. And having an understanding of both viewpoints, like I said, is trained into me, right? Like I was trained into that hardcore as a debate person, right? I had to live and wrap my mind solidly around any viewpoint, right? Like I
yeah,
had to be able to defend either side in every debate. And I really hope that for all of America, because I don't like the hating, right? Like if we could all just understand, right? Like maybe there would be some common thing and we'd have a rejuvenation, right? So I'm
there
hoping that
is.
people hear
Yeah,
this and go, I need your product, Jeff, because hey, like that's what I'm
yeah,
trying to create
yeah.
is is real critical thinking.
It is, and to your point about the polarization, the ability for our product to build the bridges of understanding. So yeah, you can build critical thinking, but guess what? We can also help the next generation bridge that understanding divide. And it's no longer about echo chambers and polarization, but we're actually allowing all the students, regardless of grade level. I mean, honestly, regardless of, you know, could be middle school, high school, higher ed, to at the click of a button, because we have a search filter that allows you to filter by media bias rating. At the click of a button, read all sides from credible sources on a given topic. It is mind blowing. It truly, it's changed my perspective. Like it is, and you can see areas of overlap. Oh my gosh, there's so much areas of overlap. And both sides have a lot of valid arguments on a lot of these topics. And
Yeah.
our tool allows you to do that. And it's really empowering.
Okay, so final comment.
So we were talking to a bunch of speech and debate teachers a little while ago, and after I demoed my product to them, I literally had one of the teachers or coaches come up and say, you know what, Jeff, your product is going to save me 1 week of time in the classroom with the students, because I spend so much time trying to train them on finding credible, reliable sources, and you've just kind of done it for me. Like, they can still get the value of understanding what it means to be credible and reliable, but you've built the lesson plans, or you have the roadmap built into your product for me. So thank you for giving me a week of my time back. And, that's music to our ears, because, knowing that we can allow or free up time for teachers to do more with the students in the classroom, rather than less, we're all for it. So that was great to hear.
Well, Mr. Jeff Walsh, this has been interesting very much. I'm sure people will enjoy this. Sooth.FYI, SOOTH.FYI is where you find him. And thank you for being with us.
Thanks so much for having me. This was a great pleasure. I enjoyed it.
All right. All right. Well, and thank you, listeners, for listening to another episode of the Learning Council's podcast. This has been your host, LeiLani. Keep listening and keep learning.